He makes a crazy overbet twice the size of the pot. I was being emotional about not wanting to bust out of the tournament, but my gut was telling me to think twice about folding here.
Hello and welcome to Live Poker Theory Episode 3, where we break down real live poker hands in solvers. In this episode, I wanted to look at this hand that Alexandra Botez, the well-known chess streamer, played, where she faced a massive double pot overbet on the river. Based on reconstructing the hand from the video, I've figured out that she had about 30 big blinds to start the hand. So this is a button versus big blind single raise pot, which is one of the most common spots in poker, especially in tougher games where people fold appropriately. It folds to the button a lot. They're supposed to open very wide. Big blind with the antes in play especially are supposed to defend very wide. So this is both an interesting hand because of the river overbet, but also a spot that you're probably going to play a lot if you play tournaments, especially 30 big blinds is also a stack depth that's very common in tournaments. Botez notes that she's concerned her opponent's opening very wide because she's an amateur and he's a professional, but in button versus big blind with an ante, he's supposed to be opening very wide. Hands like Queen 8 offsuit, Jack 8 offsuit, 10-5 suited, 9-5 suited. You know, the button has a strong incentive to try to steal those antes and be in position post-flop if called. And on the flip side, Botez should be calling super wide, almost all suited combos. She has a great price. She knows she's up against a weak range. Makes sense to take a flop. The question is what she's up to with those small pocket pairs like the pocket 2s, pocket 3s. They have a strong incentive to just go all in. They have a great equity against that wide range, but don't play well post-flop. Benefit a lot by just stealing the blinds and antes. I don't know if Botez is doing that. Maybe, so I gave her a 25% probability of having those hands in case she doesn't do that. Now we head to this flop of King of Diamonds, 6 of Clubs, Queen of Hearts. Obviously a better flop for the button pre-flop aggressor as he's going to have the pocket kings, the pocket queens, and the ace king. We'd expect Botez to have 3-bet those pre-flop. So he has about a 60-40 equity advantage and is usually betting this flop. But he does elect to check back. Let's look at the solver strategy on this flop. As we can see, he is mostly betting. The hands we're seeing checkbacks with are hands like pocket jacks, pocket 10s that have some equity but are going to always get good called by better, not really called much by worse. That ace 9, that ace 8. He's occasionally checking back hands that have her beat, such as ace queen, some of the queens with better kickers like queen 9 suited. He's sometimes trapping with top set with the top kings, and then some of the top pair low kicker that really wants to get to showdown, such as the king deuce suited, might want to check back here. That ends up being relevant on this deuce of diamonds turn, would make that king deuce suited a 2-pair. So this deuce of diamonds, the flush draw coming in is the obvious thing to look at, and Botez notes it. She does end up checking and then button puts in a half-size pot bet. She said he's not really representing much besides a flush draw, but I would actually disagree with that pretty strongly. And the reason for that is if we look at Botez's strategy, on this turn, after her opponent checks back on the flop, she wants to start building a pot with a lot of her top pair. Not only is it frequently betting, but it's actually overbetting 2x pot as the most frequent sizing. That caught me a little bit by surprise, and it's possible that you might not think to overbet in this spot either. But after she doesn't bet, it's less likely that she has a king, so a lot of his top pair that didn't want to bet flop now wants to bet. And of course she's right that the flush draws are being bet frequently. That is a major hand class that he's representing and that she should be concerned about. And she's also correct that he could have a lot of bluffs. Something like the 9-8 of hearts or the 10-6 of spades could be in there, as well as the jack 10, the jack 9, which is going to be relevant on the river. So now we get to the interesting part of this hand, this river. The 9-8 diamonds rolls off, completes that diamond flush, completes the jack 10 straight. She checks and she faces a double pot size bet that puts her all in, and certainly a extremely difficult spot. I'll also note that her play up until this point of the hand was pretty standard. She has a very middle strength hand, beats a lot of bluffs, loses to all the value, so not much else to do besides check flop, check call turn, and check this river. Though as we just noted, since she is leading a lot of her top pair on the turn, since she checked turn and now check river again, she doesn't have a lot of pair of kings, so that lends a lot of merit to calling with a pair of queens because she does have less strong hands like top pair to consider calling with instead. Now, Botez really fixates on this flush arriving. Obviously, the flush is extremely relevant. It's certainly a hand button is representing and could have, but I do think she overlooked some other possibilities. The jack 10 being notable, might want to check back flop and then bet this turn thinking he can bluff on a diamond river with a busted straight draw. You know, that's a very common heuristic to turn busted straight draws into bluffs when the flush gets there. But now if they had that Jack 10 as a bluff, it's a straight. There's also reason to be concerned about the King 9 and the pocket 9s. The solver actually has the pocket 9s here, but I think humans are going to have the King 9 more often. Both are a small concern, as well as slow played sets on the flop that are now betting for value. So let's look at this button betting strategy in the solver. And the first thing I want to call out is that this overbet is pretty much a GTO overbet. It's not some attempt to bully an amateur, which I think Botez slightly suggested. Like, oh, I'll just go all in double pot and steal the pot. The thing is, button now has a ton of strong hands, a ton of flushes. The Jack 10 straight got there, a bunch of two pair. There's even some pocket 9s in there for sets. Some of those top set, they pocket kings, slow played flop, and would play it this way. So just a ton of value. The 9 is also an interesting card because it kind of turned what would have been a lot of bluffs into made hands. Like if you had the Jack 9, you're bluffing with a gut shot straight draw on the turn, but now on this 9 of diamonds river, you have a pair of 9s that would beat hands like bottom pair that Botez might have, a pair of 6s. So now you're not going to bluff with that. You're going to check back. And the end result is that you're checking back all those medium one pair hands. You have a ton of strong hands that want to bet. And you have a few air balls that it's actually hard to get here with air balls, but if you're a good player, you'll have a few. And so if you're checking back medium strength hands, betting a range with a lot of value and some bluffs, definitely want to go for the big sizing. So that's why we see this overbet. Now, besides the strategy, I want to pull up the range explorer after this overbet is made. Let's look at least in theory, at equilibrium, what button has. As we can see, he will have a flush 26% of the time. He'll have a straight 15% of the time. He'll have a set 11% of the time. And then he has an air ball about 36% of the time down there. And I think what's worth noting is Botez correctly notes that against a double pot bet, you need 40% equity to call.
And that 40% required pot odds really is the crux of this hand, because without relevant blockers from Botez, it's almost impossible for button to even be bluffing 40% of the time for a few reasons. He has so many strong hands like sets, straights, and flushes. He is going to have a hard time having air balls with that 9 having turned a lot of his bluffs on the turn into made hands. He needs to be the type of player that is going to have the 10-8 of hearts or 10-8 of spades to bet turn and then go all in double overbet river, which maybe this high stakes pro does, but a lot of people aren't going to do in practice, which would make this call even worse. And she suggests you could have hands like ace jack or ace 10, which I think in practice are possible, but the solver won't have them because of the way the flop and turn action went. And I think many other players won't necessarily check flop and bet small turn with those hands.
So that's why when we're hero calling in this spot, there's a lot of advantages to having more relevant blockers. If we look at her specific hand, the solver is pure folding it. However, it's pure calling if she had the queen of spades, jack of diamonds. And of course, that has nothing to do with the jack being the better kicker and everything to do with the fact that you block a lot of the flush combos and you block the jack 10 straight combos. And to me, that's actually the most important takeaway of this hand, that at equilibrium, she needs 40% equity to justify a call, but he's only bluffing 33% of the time, unless you have those blockers, that jack of diamonds, that would change his percentage of value to bluffs to be more bluff heavy, where he is bluffing more than 40% of the time. So we think blockers is a subtle thing, but actually it can cross the threshold in terms of pot odds from a fold to a call. And ultimately, she kind of acknowledges that this is probably not a theoretically correct call. She decided to go with her gut, which she has every right to do.
Racing through my head as I'm depleting my time bank chips, my heart is beating out of my chest, and there's so much adrenaline in my blood that I feel a little bit high. I made the call, and turns out I was right. He was bluffing.
I had queen 7. Oh my god.
So good for her, she won the hand. I would not recommend trying this at home. Let's do some quick key takeaways. So first takeaway is don't overfixate on one hand class for your opponent. I think she was really thinking about the flush, not enough about the straight and the sets. Second takeaway is that overbets are correct in several spots at 30 big blind, including the turn probe and the river imposition bet. Third takeaway is to consider blockers not just to your opponent's value range, but to their bluffing range, both the cards in your hand and the cards that show up on the board. The fourth takeaway is that blockers are pretty significant and can turn a losing call into a winning one just based on pot odds. And the final takeaway is that sometimes the theory nerds are wrong in the specific exact spot, and you win a big pot and get a lot of adrenaline by going with your gut, even if the YouTuber recommends against it. Okay, that's all. Thanks for watching. Constructive criticism on the video editing, always appreciated. Patience as I suck at it less over time. Hope you guys win a lot of the tables. Thanks.